Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 30 of my 2021 reads. This week I read a bunch of great books that I would definitely recommend, and a book that I DNF'd that I also would recommend. The first book that I finished this week was Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley. This is a book that I heard about from Melitta at the Midnight Librarian, who I will link below, as well as her review of Firekeeper's Daughter. If you haven't checked out Melitta's channel, I really highly recommend it. She is from the Yurok tribe in Northern California, and she reviews a ton of different indigenous literature, plus a bunch of new releases. She participates in tons of readathons, she does vlogs, all sorts of cool things, so I really like her channel. So this book is a YA mystery thriller, so a little bit outside of my comfort zone, but I was really intrigued because it's talking about a teenage girl who is half Ojibwe, half white, and she is trying to uncover some of the things that are going on in her community where some girls keep ending up dead. And so this is all about her work trying to uncover what's going on and her connection to her Ojibwe community. There's tons in this that really is exploring a lot of what it means to be Indigenous in the US today, a lot of what it means also to have to deal with some of the issues of being, part Ojibwe. So things like blood quantum and all of these other issues affecting the Ojibwe community, stuff like the per capita income from casinos, things like microaggressions from white people, things like complicated territorial kind of legal jurisdictions, all sorts of cool things. I think that this book really is such a great one for understanding a lot of those issues in a fiction context. And Angeline Boulley is Ojibwe herself. The ending of this was a little bit too YA thriller-y for me. So it really went into high gear in the last quarter of the book. Tons of action, lots of drama, lots of decisions that I was just, wanted to shout at the characters. Why are you doing this? Why don't you call that person? Why don't you do these things? Which I think is the appeal of a lot of that kind of thrillery type of books. But for me, that part was the weakest. Even so, I think that this book was doing really cool things. So if you like thrillers, if you like that kind of action at the end, if you like, just the drama and the danger and all of that, I definitely think this should be up your alley. And even for me not liking that part, I loved, especially the first 3/4 of this, all of that complexity of the main character exploring her identity and dealing with the issues of her community. I thought was really cool. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Passing by Nella Larson. I buddy read this with Laureen at Books at the Bottom of the Stairs, who I will link below. Laureen reads a lot of classics as well as a lot of middle grade, things like that. And this is one that we had both been wanting to get to. So Passing is a book that was written during the Harlem Renaissance. It takes place in the 1920s, and you feel the Harlem Renaissance in this. You feel this really cool sense of the time and the place, but the story itself is just something that reaches across time and feels so incredibly relatable. We follow 2 women who, growing up, are both very fair-skinned Black women. And when they reach adulthood, one of them immerses herself in sort of the Black community in Harlem. The other one passes for white and marries a guy who happens to be quite racist. And they reconnect later on in life when they both have kids, and find that there's some tensions and some interesting issues, especially the one who is passing as white is realizing that she misses a lot of the connection to her actual community and feels very isolated. This book is something I'd heard so many good things about, and it is deserved. When I finished reading this, I thought, why did I have to go through reading Catcher in the Rye and The Old Man and the Sea when I was in high school when there's classics like this? This is so good. And I think what I really, really liked about this is not only is it exploring a ton of interesting social issues in terms of race and class and all of these other things, but this book is very filled with complicated characters. The two women in this are both incredibly flawed in very different ways, but also very similar ways. And the story is so much about women who have to make choices to find the kind of life that they want in a society that is constraining them and making them powerless in a lot of ways. And so how do they gain that power? And it is just so fascinating. It has almost a little bit of a mystery thriller feel as well, but a lot gentler. I loved the ending of this so much, and I loved just the way that the characters unfolded and the decisions that they made. I was so thoroughly engaged in this. I definitely recommend it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I finished Rez Dogs by Joseph Bruchac, which I heard about from Yvette at BookCave, who I will link below. Yvette has great middle grade recommendations, and this is another great middle grade rec from her. So this is a middle grade contemporary told in verse, very, very recent, about a Wabanaki girl who is visiting with her grandparents on their reservation when COVID-19 hits, and she gets kind of isolated and stranded there while her parents are in Boston. And so this is all of these little chapter anecdotes of her interactions and dealing with being isolated on the res, but also explores so much of, again, issues of being Indigenous in contemporary US. And I think that this explains a lot of that for a middle grade audience in a really approachable way. There's a lot of storytelling in here. The grandparents are big on telling stories, but there's also so much about, you know, the history of things like residential schools and how that still impacts them, or forced sterilization, or things like maybe Indigenous peoples have been through entire pandemics that have wiped out populations before. And so many of these things, also just little things like the lack of reliable internet connection on the res, and the girl trying to tune in for her classes via an internet that isn't really reliable. All these sorts of things. It was so well done. I was so moved by this. And if you like animals, I think you'll really like this, because one of the main things that happens is a dog that's very wolf-like appears and kind of befriends and protects the little girl, especially from, people who are coughing and not wearing masks trying to come to their door. It is just so sweet and so moving, and just explores a lot of contemporary Indigenous issues in such a good way. I really, really loved this. Definitely recommend it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read a book that I had been very much anticipating, which is The Witness for the Dead by Katherine Addison, which is a companion novel to The Goblin Emperor, which I do have a review for, so I'll link that below. Sush, my husband, read this out loud to me, and we had such a good time reading it. It is just such a wonderful world to immerse yourself in. It's this sort of low fantasy steampunk world that has goblins and elves, very complicated social interactions, and a little bit of magic here and there. So the story itself revolves around this character, Thara Selahar, who is a witness for the dead, which means that he can speak to the spirits of the recently departed before those spirits kind of dissipate, and he's supposed to witness for them, kind of make sure that they have justice. And so this ends up being kind of a cozy mystery, because he ends up having to witness for a recently deceased woman who perhaps was murdered. And we also see just his daily life, his daily interactions, some of the issues he has with other people in his profession, some of the interactions with him interviewing different people. And it's just such a sweet story, because he's a good guy who wants to just fulfill his purpose, to be there to witness for these spirits and to make sure that they have whatever they need to kind of, have justice. It is really beautifully written. I love the world building. It's very calm and cozy and sweet story. There's a little bit of, just a little bit of gruesomeness in the middle when he encounters a situation that he has to deal with that has a little bit of violence in it. But other than that, it's just so sweet. Also, I will say that this is truly a companion novel. It's set in the same world, but it doesn't involve any of the characters from the first book, and you really don't have to have read that one in order to fully enjoy this one. The thing about this one is that rather than following like the court intrigue like the Goblin Emperor did, this one's all about everyday people. It's about the working class, and you really feel that, and I love seeing that side of this world. So thoroughly enjoy reading this, really definitely recommend it, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I DNF'd a book, which was Bestiary by K-Ming Chang, which I was supposed to buddy read with Freddie at Sluggish Reader, who I will link below. I love buddy reading with Freddie because he always has tons of great insight. So I was looking forward to that, but unfortunately, this one was way too graphic for me. So I got 9% in before I DNF'd, and even that was perhaps a little far because this is graphic. And not graphic in terms of like huge amounts of, violence, but just so graphic in the descriptions of everything, just lots of bodily things and just so much detail in a way that kind of grossed me out. But the writing in this is so amazing. I was so sad to DNF this because the writing was just stunning. I loved the way that it was written, and I loved the sort of perspective that it was taking. I have a feeling though that the content in this really truly will be quite heavy. I didn't get far enough in to know so much about what the story is, but what I've heard is that this is sort of a generational story of some Taiwanese women who maybe have a little bit of a tiger woman spirit inside of them. And yeah, so yeah, lots of stuff like eating toes, just lots of gross stuff in here. But if you can handle more gruesome things, I really thought that the writing in this was spectacular, and I would really recommend it for anybody who's not squeamish like me. Okay, so that is everything that I read and DNF'd this week. Also, I am working on a weekend reading vlog, so that will include some of these and be up later on this week. If you guys have any thoughts, if you have any recommendations, if you have anything that you want to chat with me about, just leave me a comment down below.